2002. London's fashion world hangs Barbara Goalen's photograph on an exhibition wall. Dior gown, swan neck, eyes cold as Arctic glass. Visitors stop in awe. Yet the caption, Barbara Goalen, 1950s, lands like a question mark. Who? The woman who once defined post-war elegance had already vanished decades earlier, alive but unseen, a ghost haunting her own perfection. When she dies quietly in Surrey at age 83, even the fashion press that once worshipped her barely notices. The ice goddess has completed her transformation into pure spirit, leaving behind only photographs to prove she ever existed. I was not beautiful. I was an idea of beauty, Barbara had said with chilling precision during her peak years, and history proved the cruel accuracy of her words. The idea survived in museum exhibitions and coffee table books, but the woman behind it disappeared so thoroughly that her death registered as little more than a footnote in industry publications. She had achieved the ultimate expression of the elegance she embodied, becoming so refined that she transcended physical existence entirely. The irony cuts deeper than any couturier's blade. Here was a woman who became famous for being untouchable, whose greatest asset was her ability to project an elegance so remote it seemed to exist beyond ordinary human experience. Elegance is not comfort, it is control, she once observed with the precision of someone who understood that her entire value lay in maintaining perfect composure, while her inner life remained completely hidden from view. The photographs preserving Barbara's legacy tell a story of transformation and imprisonment that their subject could never have anticipated. Cecil Beaton's portraits capture a figure who seems carved from ice, beautiful but remote, perfect but somehow tragic in her isolation. Norman Parkinson's images freeze moments of such refined perfection they feel more like religious icons than fashion photography. But these same images document the creation of a prison, the construction of an identity so specific and demanding that the woman inside it eventually suffocated beneath its weight. Fashion gave me everything, and then took it all away, Barbara confided to friends during her middle years. But by then she had already begun the long process of disappearance that would define her final decades. The ice goddess, who had once graced every major magazine cover in Britain, chose invisibility over irrelevance, silence over the indignity of watching younger faces claim the spotlight she had once commanded with such devastating effectiveness. The question haunting Barbara's story isn't why she disappeared from public life. It's how someone who embodied such perfect control lost control of her own narrative so completely, vanishing from the very industry she had helped define while living another 40 years in complete obscurity. To understand how the Queen of Vogue became a forgotten footnote who died unnoticed, we must journey back to the beginning, when elegance was armor, beauty was strategy, and a shy woman discovered she could become untouchable by making herself literally impossible to touch. January 1st, 1919, Edgware, London. Barbara Eileen Goalen enters a world still reeling from the Great War's devastation, born into a middle-class household where propriety matters more than passion, and appearances matter more than emotions. Her father's civil service position provides respectability. Her mother, Eileen, maintains standards that value control over spontaneity. And young Barbara learns that the highest achievement for any woman is the ability to remain composed, regardless of circumstances. The Goalen household operates according to principles of understated English refinement that will shape Barbara's understanding of how women should present themselves to the world. Her mother represents the kind of quiet sophistication that never seeks attention but somehow commands it through sheer force of proper breeding. These early lessons in self-containment and emotional restraint become so deeply ingrained in Barbara's personality that she will never learn to separate her authentic self from the performance of refinement. The discovery of Barbara's unusual beauty occurs gradually, as teachers and family friends begin commenting on her extraordinary bone structure and natural poise with an intensity that makes her deeply uncomfortable. Unlike beautiful children who learn to use their appearance for attention and advantage, Barbara finds beauty burdensome, a quality that draws unwanted scrutiny and conflicts with her family's emphasis on privacy and discretion. Her education provides the cultural foundation that will later distinguish her from other models, but it also reinforces her natural inclination toward observation rather than participation. Teachers describe a student who excels academically while remaining mysteriously distant from classmates. Someone who seems to study social dynamics from outside rather than naturally engaging with them. World War II's outbreak when Barbara is 20 dramatically alters her trajectory while paradoxically preparing her for the career that will make her famous. The war years require everyone to maintain composure under extreme pressure, to project confidence while experiencing fear, to appear normal during circumstances that are anything but ordinary. These skills, performance under pressure, emotional control, the ability to embody ideals while suppressing personal feelings, will prove invaluable in front of fashion cameras. Barbara's work during the war remains largely undocumented, but friends describe someone who maintained characteristic elegance even during air raids and rationing, someone naturally suited to the kind of grace under pressure that the British public desperately needed to see reflected in their cultural figures. The war teaches her that personal desires must be subordinated to larger purposes, that individual comfort matters less than collective morale. Lessons that will influence her approach to modeling throughout her career. The war's end in 1945 finds Barbara approaching 30, considered past typical modeling age but perfectly positioned to embody the sophisticated elegance that post-war Britain desperately wants to project. The country needs symbols of revival and refinement, evidence that civilization has not only survived but emerged more elegant than before. Barbara's combination of maturity, poise, and untouchable beauty makes her ideal for representing this cultural moment when Christian Dior's New Look begins revolutionizing fashion and Britain starts rebuilding its identity. 1947 arrives like a revolution wrapped in silk, as Christian Dior's New Look explodes across the fashion world and transforms not just clothing, but the entire conception of post-war femininity. For Barbara Goalen, now approaching 30 and considered ancient by typical modeling standards, this cultural moment represents an unexpected opportunity to embark on the career that will define her public life while slowly consuming her private identity. The New Look's emphasis on structured elegance, impossibly narrow waists, and aristocratic bearing perfectly suits Barbara's natural attributes and carefully cultivated persona. While younger models struggle to embody the sophistication that Dior's designs demand, Barbara possesses the maturity, poise, and instinctive understanding of haute couture that allows her to inhabit these clothes as if they were designed specifically for her 19-inch waist and swan-like neck. The fashion world, desperate for faces that can credibly represent post-war luxury and refinement, discovers in Barbara someone who doesn't simply wear elegant clothes. She becomes the very concept of elegance itself. Cecil Beaton's first photographs of Barbara establish the visual language that will define her entire career and ultimately trap her within an image she can never escape. Beaton understands that Barbara's appeal lies not in conventional prettiness but in her ability to project an otherworldly perfection that exists beyond ordinary human experience. His camera captures someone who seems to have transcended normal emotional range, achieving a state of composed superiority that makes viewers simultaneously admire and feel inadequate in comparison. The collaboration between Barbara and Beaton produces some of fashion photography's most enduring images. Photographs that define not just 1950s style but the very concept of untouchable elegance. In Beaton's portraits, Barbara appears as a figure carved from ice, beautiful but remote, perfect but somehow tragic in her isolation from ordinary human warmth. These images establish her as more than a model. She becomes a symbol, an ideal, a representation of what post-war femininity could achieve when properly disciplined and controlled. Norman Parkinson's approach to photographing Barbara reveals different aspects of her appeal while reinforcing the same fundamental message. Here is a woman who has achieved perfect mastery over herself and her environment. Parkinson's outdoor shoots capture Barbara in movement, walking, turning, gesturing with swans in the background. But even in motion, she maintains the kind of composed elegance that suggests complete self-possession. She never appears spontaneous or caught off guard. Every gesture seems calculated to achieve maximum visual impact while revealing nothing about the person creating these carefully orchestrated moments. The Vogue covers featuring Barbara during this period transform her from working model into cultural icon. But they also complete her transformation from person into symbol. Each cover image presents a different version of the same basic message. Ultimate sophistication is possible, but only through complete mastery of emotion, desire, and individual personality. Barbara becomes the face of a particular kind of post-war ambition, the belief that proper discipline and sufficient control can elevate someone above ordinary human limitations. I was not beautiful. I was an idea of beauty, Barbara observes during an interview from this period, demonstrating the kind of analytical distance from her own image that both enables her success and suggests the psychological costs of treating oneself as an artistic creation rather than a human being. This comment reveals her understanding that her value to the fashion industry lies not in personal qualities, but in her ability to embody abstract concepts that exist independently of her individual identity. The collaboration with haute couture houses during Barbara's peak period requires her to become a living mannequin for designs that prioritize visual impact over comfort, mobility, or individual expression. The clothes she models, Dior's architectural gowns, Balenciaga's sculptural coats, Hardy Amy's precisely tailored suits, demand complete submission to their aesthetic requirements. Barbara learns to move, breathe, and exist within these garments without disturbing their perfect lines or compromising their visual integrity. The physical demands of maintaining her signature silhouette become increasingly extreme as the fashion industry's expectations crystallize around her image. The 19-inch waist that makes her perfect for new look silhouettes requires constant vigilance about diet, posture, and breathing. Colleagues notice that Barbara eats sparingly during shoots, as if food itself might compromise the architectural precision of her figure. The corseting required for certain designs leaves marks on her skin that take hours to fade, but she never complains, treating physical discomfort as simply another professional requirement. The psychological pressure of embodying perfection extends beyond photo shoots into every aspect of Barbara's public existence. She cannot be seen looking anything less than flawless, cannot display emotion that might compromise her image of serene control, cannot engage in normal human activities that might suggest she's anything more than the living statue her career has made her. Friends describe someone who has learned to exist in a state of constant performance, unable to relax even in private moments. Because the habits of perfection have become so deeply ingrained, the financial rewards of her success during this period provide Barbara with material security but also create golden handcuffs that make escape from her persona increasingly difficult. As the highest-paid model in Britain, she becomes financially dependent on maintaining the very image that's slowly suffocating her authentic self. The contracts and endorsement deals that ensure her wealth also ensure her continued imprisonment within an identity that allows no room for growth, change, or simple human fallibility. The isolation that comes with her unique position in the fashion world becomes more pronounced as her fame increases. Other models see her as competition or inspiration, but rarely as a peer. Photographers treat her as a perfect instrument rather than a collaborator, and designers view her as the ideal vehicle for their creations, rather than a person with her own ideas and preferences. The very perfection that makes her invaluable also makes her untouchable in ways that extend far beyond her professional image. Perhaps most tragically, Barbara's success requires her to abandon any possibility of authentic self-expression or personal growth. The woman who emerges in photographs is frozen at a particular moment of aesthetic perfection, but human beings naturally evolve, age, and change. Barbara finds herself trapped in amber, required to remain exactly the same while everything around her shifts and develops. The price of becoming an icon is the surrender of the right to become anything else. By 1954, Barbara has become the most photographed woman in England, a distinction that sounds like achievement but feels increasingly like imprisonment. The woman who once found solace in control discovers that complete control requires complete self-suppression, that embodying perfection means abandoning any possibility of authentic human expression. The ice goddess has achieved everything she thought she wanted, but the achievement has frozen her into a position from which escape seems impossible. The studio sessions during her peak period reveal the mechanical precision required to maintain her image, with photographers treating her more like a sophisticated piece of equipment than a human collaborator. She learns to hold poses for extended periods without movement, to project exactly the right degree of aloofness without seeming hostile, to embody elegance so completely that viewers forget they're looking at a real person rather than an artistic creation. These skills serve her professionally while gradually eroding her capacity for spontaneous human interaction. The late 1950s bring the first tremors of cultural earthquake that will eventually topple Barbara from her throne as Britain's reigning queen of elegance. The emergence of youth culture, rock and roll, and a new generation that values authenticity over refinement begins challenging the very foundations of the sophisticated world Barbara has come to embody. But the changes come slowly at first, allowing her to maintain her position even as the ground shifts beneath the entire fashion establishment. The industry that created Barbara's success proves remarkably slow to recognize its own obsolescence, continuing to celebrate the kind of untouchable elegance she represents even as younger photographers experiment with more naturalistic approaches to beauty and style. Vogue's editors remain loyal to the aesthetic Barbara perfected, but circulation numbers suggest readers are growing restless with images that seem increasingly disconnected from the social changes transforming British society. Barbara's awareness of these shifts manifests in subtle changes to her approach during this period. Colleagues notice increased tension during photo shoots, a perfectionism that crosses the line into anxiety, and occasional comments suggesting someone beginning to question the sustainability of a career built entirely on maintaining an image that requires more effort each year to sustain. "Elegance is not comfort, it is control," she tells an interviewer. But the comment suggests someone for whom control has become exhausting rather than empowering. The technical demands of fashion photography increasingly favor models who can project energy, spontaneity, and relatability, qualities that directly contradict everything Barbara has spent years perfecting. Her ability to remain composed and distant, once considered the height of sophistication, begins seeming dated in an era that values emotional accessibility and natural charm over aristocratic reserve. The emergence of Twiggy in the mid-1960s represents more than just another new face. It signals a complete revolution in beauty standards that makes Barbara's particular brand of elegance suddenly seem as antiquated as Victorian mourning clothes. Twiggy's appeal lies precisely in her accessibility, her apparent naturalness, her ability to seem like a friend rather than a remote goddess. The contrast with Barbara's carefully maintained mystique could not be more complete or more devastating to someone whose entire career depends on embodying unattainable perfection. The cultural shift that Twiggy represents goes beyond mere aesthetics to encompass fundamental changes in how society views femininity, class, and aspiration. Where Barbara had embodied post-war desires for refinement and sophistication, Twiggy captures the youth movement's rejection of traditional hierarchies and formal structures. The mod movement, Carnaby Street fashion, and the emerging counterculture all celebrate qualities that directly contradict everything Barbara represents: spontaneity over control, youth over maturity, rebellion over refinement. The speed with which the fashion industry abandons Barbara's aesthetic reveals the brutal mathematics of an industry that values novelty above loyalty. Photographers who had once competed for sessions with her suddenly show no interest in working with someone whose image represents everything the new generation is rebelling against. Magazine editors who had once celebrated her as the pinnacle of sophistication now treat her style as dated, appropriate only for nostalgic retrospectives rather than contemporary editorial content. The personal impact of this professional rejection proves particularly devastating because Barbara had invested so completely in an identity that left no room for reinvention or adaptation. Unlike actresses who can choose different roles or musicians who can evolve their sound, models who become too associated with specific aesthetics often find themselves trapped when cultural preferences shift. Barbara's very perfection becomes her liability. She had become so identified with one particular vision of beauty that she couldn't transition to anything else. The psychological toll of watching a younger generation explicitly reject everything she represents affects Barbara in ways that go beyond professional disappointment. She begins to question not just her career choices, but the fundamental values that had shaped her entire approach to life. Had her pursuit of perfect control been misguided? Was the elegance she had spent decades perfecting actually a form of emotional death? These questions torment someone who had built her entire identity around principles that society now dismisses as irrelevant or even harmful. The few attempts Barbara makes to adapt to changing fashion trends only highlight how completely she had become identified with the specific aesthetic. Photographers experimenting with more naturalistic approaches to her image create results that feel forced and uncomfortable, as if they're asking a classical statue to dance. The very qualities that made her perfect for 1950s elegance. The emotional distance, the aristocratic bearing, the untouchable perfection, prove impossible to modify or modernize. The fashion industry's abandonment of Barbara happens with shocking swiftness once editors and photographers recognize that cultural preferences have shifted permanently. Phone calls become less frequent, bookings dry up, and younger photographers show no interest in working with someone whose aesthetic represents everything their generation is rebelling against. The woman who once commanded the highest fees in British fashion finds herself unemployed not because her skills have diminished, but because the skills themselves are no longer valued. The financial implications of this professional obsolescence force Barbara to confront realities that her peak years had allowed her to ignore. The lifestyle her modeling career had supported, the elegant wardrobe, the sophisticated social circles, the London flat filled with beautiful objects, becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as income disappears. But more devastating than financial concerns is the existential crisis of discovering that her entire adult identity has become worthless overnight. Fashion gave me everything and then took it all away, Barbara reflects during this period, capturing both the material benefits her career provided and the complete helplessness she experiences as those benefits evaporate. The industry that elevated her to iconic status proves equally efficient at erasure, moving on to new faces and new ideals without sentimentality or backward glances. The same system that had once competed for her services now treats her as a relic from an embarrassingly outdated era. The social isolation that accompanies Barbara's professional decline proves even more difficult than the financial challenges. Friends and acquaintances from her modeling years begin treating her differently, as if her fall from fashion relevance has made her somehow contagious. The glamorous social events she had once attended as an honored guest now feel awkward and painful, with younger attendees treating her as a curiosity from a bygone era rather than a peer deserving of respect. The psychological impact of this professional rejection proves particularly devastating for someone whose entire adult identity has been built around embodying unattainable elegance. Barbara finds herself too associated with outdated ideals to reinvent herself professionally, but too defined by her public image to develop authentic personal relationships that might provide alternative sources of validation and meaning. The decision to retire from modeling in her 40s represents both acceptance of professional reality and a final assertion of the control that has always been central to her identity. Rather than attempting to adapt to changing standards or accepting lesser roles within an industry that no longer values her contributions, Barbara chooses to disappear entirely, maintaining her mystique through absence rather than risking its diminishment through compromise. "I have been a mannequin long enough," she tells friends during this period. "I want to be a ghost now." Ugh. The comment proves prophetic in ways she couldn't have anticipated. Within a few years, Barbara Goalen achieves the kind of invisibility that makes her peak fame seem like something that happened to someone else entirely, leaving behind only photographs to prove that the ice goddess ever existed at all. The 1970s witnessed Barbara Goalen's complete withdrawal from public life, a disappearance so thorough that even fashion historians struggle to trace her activities during these decades. The woman who once defined elegance for an entire generation chooses invisibility over compromise, silence over adaptation, becoming a ghost while still living, the ultimate expression of the control that had always been central to her identity and appeal. The practical aspects of Barbara's withdrawal remain largely mysterious, as she deliberately avoids interviews, public appearances, and any contact with the fashion industry that once celebrated her. The few friends who maintain contact during this period describe someone who has traded haute couture gowns and photographers' studios for gardening clothes and complete privacy, finding peace in activities that require no audience and generate no images for public consumption. The house Barbara retreats to in Surrey becomes her sanctuary from a world that no longer has use for what she represents. The property, modest by the standards of her peak earning years, offers the kind of privacy that allows her to explore aspects of herself that decades of public performance had suppressed. For the first time since childhood, she can move through her days without considering how her appearance or behavior might be perceived by others, without calculating the effect of every gesture and expression. The psychological implications of this radical transformation suggest someone finally attempting to discover who she might be when not performing elegance for others' benefit, after decades of treating herself as an artistic creation rather than a human being. Barbara begins the difficult process of developing an authentic identity separate from the images that made her famous, but ultimately proved insufficient to sustain a complete life. This journey proves more challenging than she anticipated, as the habits of performance and emotional control have become so deeply ingrained that spontaneous feeling or expression feels foreign and uncomfortable. The garden becomes Barbara's primary form of self-expression during these years, offering opportunities for creativity that don't require cameras, critics, or public approval. The roses she tends and the vegetables she grows respond to care and attention rather than perfect presentation, allowing her to experience nurturing relationships that exist purely for their own sake. Friends who visit describe someone who talks about her plants with the same intensity she once brought to discussing fashion, but with a warmth and genuine enthusiasm that had been absent during her modeling years. Her relationship with animals during this period provides another avenue for authentic emotional connection that her professional life had never permitted. The cats and dogs that share her Surrey home don't care about her former fame or current obscurity. They respond to her presence, her consistency, and her genuine affection. These relationships, simple as they might seem, represent Barbara's first experiences with unconditional acceptance since childhood, offering emotional sustenance that no amount of professional acclaim had ever provided. The rare glimpses of Barbara during her retirement years reveal someone who has found unexpected satisfaction in ordinary activities that her modeling career never permitted her to explore. Cooking becomes a form of creative expression that serves immediate practical purposes rather than abstract aesthetic goals. Reading, which she had always enjoyed but rarely had time for during her peak years, becomes a source of intellectual stimulation and emotional exploration that helps her understand experiences and perspectives beyond her own limited world. The physical changes that accompany Barbara's withdrawal from public life prove liberating in ways she never anticipated. For the first time in decades, she can eat what she wants when she wants, can allow her body to assume natural positions rather than constantly maintaining perfect posture, can age gracefully without worrying about maintaining the impossible standards her career had demanded. The 19-inch waist that once defined her image becomes a memory rather than a daily requirement, replaced by the simple pleasure of moving comfortably through her own home. The financial challenges of maintaining her lifestyle on greatly reduced income forced Barbara to confront practical realities she had never needed to consider during her peak years. Learning to budget, to comparison shop, to maintain her own home rather than relying on professional services proves surprisingly satisfying. These mundane activities connect her to ordinary human experience in ways that her rarefied professional world had never allowed. The fashion world's amnesia regarding Barbara's contributions becomes apparent as retrospective exhibitions about 1950s style consistently feature her images while rarely mentioning her name. She becomes an anonymous symbol of an era, her face familiar to anyone studying fashion history but her identity forgotten by curators who treat her as a representative type rather than an individual artist who helped define an aesthetic movement. This erasure, while painful, also provides a form of freedom. She can finally exist without the burden of living up to her own legend. The irony of Barbara's posthumous reputation reflects broader patterns in how fashion treats its icons, preserving their images while discarding their personalities, celebrating their contributions while ignoring their humanity. The photographs that immortalized her continue appearing in museums and coffee table books, but always as examples of period style rather than documents of a particular woman's artistic collaboration with photographers and designers. She watches her own image become historical artifact while she herself remains alive but invisible. The social isolation of these years proves both challenging and liberating. While Barbara misses certain aspects of the sophisticated social world she once inhabited, she also discovers relief in not having to constantly perform elegance and control for others' benefit. The few friendships she maintains during this period are with people who knew her before her fame or who care nothing about her former celebrity. Relationships that allow her to experiment with authentic expression without fear of judgment or exploitation. Letters and phone calls from the fashion industry occasionally penetrate her privacy, offering opportunities for comeback attempts, retrospective interviews, or celebrity appearances that might restore some measure of public attention. Barbara consistently declines these overtures, understanding that any return to public life would require her to resurrect the persona she has worked so hard to escape. The ice goddess must remain buried if the woman is to survive. "I was paid to be perfect, and it ruined me," Barbara reportedly confides to a friend during her final years, suggesting someone who has finally achieved enough distance from her career to recognize its psychological costs. The comment reveals both the financial benefits her profession provided and the personal price of treating human emotion and individual personality as obstacles to be overcome rather than qualities to be celebrated. The question haunting Barbara's final decades centers on whether her withdrawal from public life represents liberation or another form of imprisonment. Has she finally escaped the persona that trapped her for so many years? Or has she simply replaced one form of isolation with another? The privacy she maintains makes any definitive answer impossible, but the thoroughness of her disappearance suggests someone determined to control her own narrative, even if that means ensuring no narrative exists at all. The health challenges that accompany Barbara's advancing age during the 1990s force her to confront mortality in ways that her youth-obsessed former profession had never permitted. The physical vulnerabilities that come with aging, reduced mobility, health scares, the need for medical care, require her to develop relationships with healthcare providers and caregivers who see her as she actually is, rather than as the frozen image from her modeling days. These interactions, though sometimes difficult, provide her with experiences of being valued for her present self rather than her past achievements. The digital revolution that transforms media during her later years creates new forms of immortality for her images while ensuring her continued obscurity as a person. The internet makes her photographs more accessible than ever before, with fashion websites and social media accounts regularly featuring her pictures as examples of classic elegance. Yet this increased visibility of her image coincides with her deepest invisibility as a human being. Millions of people can view her pictures with a single click, but almost none of them know her name or understand the story behind the icy perfection they admire. The few journalists and fashion historians who attempt to trace Barbara's later life for retrospective articles find themselves confronted with her determined privacy and the fashion industry's collective amnesia about its former stars. Phone numbers lead to disconnected lines, addresses prove outdated, and former colleagues claim to have lost touch decades earlier. This systematic erasure of her personal history while her professional images become more widely circulated than ever creates a peculiar form of fame. She is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, instantly recognizable and completely unknown. The emergence of supermodel culture during the 1980s and 1990s provides an interesting contrast to Barbara's own experience of fashion fame, where she had maintained mystery through emotional distance and perfect control. Newer stars achieve celebrity through apparent accessibility and personal revelation. The comparison highlights how completely the fashion industry's relationship with its models had changed. Where Barbara had been valued precisely for her unknowability, contemporary models were expected to share their personal lives, opinions, and authentic personalities with the public. The few contemporary models who discover Barbara's work during their own careers sometimes attempt to track her down, hoping to learn from someone who had achieved such iconic status. These efforts invariably fail, not because Barbara is impossible to find, but because she has made herself impossible to reach by anyone connected to the fashion industry. The ice goddess maintains her mystique through absolute absence, proving that perfect control sometimes requires complete withdrawal. As Barbara enters her final years, the internet age brings unexpected challenges to her carefully maintained privacy. While she successfully avoids personal contact with the fashion world, she cannot control how her images are used, discussed, or interpreted online. Fashion blogs and social media accounts regularly feature her photographs, often without proper attribution or understanding of their historical context. She becomes a meme before the term exists, an instantly recognizable symbol whose actual identity remains mysterious to most viewers. The irony of the digital age's treatment of Barbara's legacy reflects broader changes in how society values privacy, authenticity, and personal agency. In an era where celebrities are expected to share intimate details of their lives through social media, Barbara's absolute refusal to participate in public discourse makes her seem almost extraterrestrial. Her commitment to privacy, which had once seemed like sophisticated mystique, now appears almost incomprehensible to generations raised on personal branding and constant connectivity. When Barbara Goalen dies on June 16, 2002, her death receives minimal attention from the fashion press that once competed for her services. The obituaries that do appear are brief and factual, focusing on her peak years during the 1950s while providing few details about her life before or after fame. Most publications run the same handful of photographs, the iconic beaten portraits and Parkinson shots that had defined her career, alongside text that treats her more as a historical artifact than a recently deceased human being. The fashion industry's muted response to Barbara's death reveals how completely she had achieved her goal of disappearing from their world. Editors and photographers who might have been expected to write lengthy tributes instead offer brief acknowledgments that focus almost entirely on her professional contributions, while ignoring the personal cost of her achievements. The woman who had embodied untouchable elegance achieves ultimate untouchability through death, becoming truly impossible to reach, interview, or exploit for contemporary purposes. The legacy Barbara leaves behind exists almost entirely in photographs that continue to define sophisticated elegance decades after her death. Museum exhibitions about fashion history routinely feature her images, but always as anonymous representations of period style rather than documents of individual artistic achievement. She has become exactly what she once claimed to be, not a beautiful woman, but an idea of beauty, preserved in perfect images that reveal nothing about the person who created them. The ice goddess who became a ghost achieved the kind of immortality that only photographs can provide, but at the cost of the human recognition that might have provided satisfaction during her lifetime. Her story serves as both tribute to the power of perfectly controlled imagery and warning about the price of treating oneself as an artwork, rather than a person deserving of love, understanding, and authentic connection with others. Barbara Goalen's greatest achievement may have been her disappearance, the ability to vanish so completely that she became pure mystery, ultimate elegance expressed through absence rather than presence. In becoming a ghost, she achieved the kind of untouchable perfection that her modeling career had always pursued but never quite reached, proving that sometimes the most elegant solution to an impossible situation is simply to stop participating in it entirely. She spent her final 40 years as living proof that the most perfect photographs capture subjects who no longer exist, that the most enduring images preserve moments that were always more beautiful than the lives that created them. But perhaps Barbara's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the price of perfection and the nature of beauty itself. In an age where social media demands constant performance and personal branding has become essential for professional success, what can we learn from someone who achieved ultimate fame only to discover it was a form of imprisonment? When we celebrate iconic images of elegance and sophistication, are we honoring artistic achievement or perpetuating systems that sacrifice human authenticity for aesthetic perfection? And most haunting of all, was Barbara Goalen's disappearance an act of liberation, or simply another form of performance, the ultimate expression of control by someone who had learned that the most powerful way to command attention is to completely withdraw it? In a world that still worships the very images that trapped her, how do we separate the idea of beauty from the human cost of creating it?